Hi, welcome to the AmericanHistorian.org. I'm Jonathan Fassett, a doctoral candidate in history at Liberty University. Today, I want to talk about my latest research, which is a cultural history of 1950s American teenagers and rock and roll music. American teenagers of the 1950s had more free time, social interaction, and disposable income than ever before in American history. They escaped from their homes and away from their parents, where you could find them at their local McDonald's, which in 1953 had only 3 restaurants and catered almost exclusively to teenagers. These teenagers experimented with their individuality in every imaginable way. From hot rod cars and rock and roll music to the new wave of American consumerism, teenagers rightfully thought that popular culture was all about them. Of these many new avenues of freedom, the most important was their relationship with Black America's rock and roll music. This profoundly satisfying, rebellious music pushed forward a new cultural relationship in American society between white American teenagers and Black America. White teenagers, Black musicians, and rock and roll music would be the foundational element that the 20th century's racial relationship would find itself built. The civil rights movement and America's integration is typically examined from a social or political history, as Taylor Branch's Pulitzer Prize-winning book, Parting the Waters, America in the King Years, 1954 through 63, reveal. Instead, a cultural history of the teenager of the 1950s can offer a new perspective on a generation who had to make their own choices about divisive topics such as racial relationships daily. One of the first choices American teenagers made daily was what radio station to tune in and listen to. The radio disc jockey, Alan Freed, became acutely aware of what teenagers enjoyed listening to, and he would become known as someone who would break down racial norms in music as he played new rock and roll music for these white teenagers. People like Alan Freed are essential because not only was he the first to popularize the term rock and roll on the radio, but he refused to play white cover bands, instead demanding that Black bands be allowed to play their music themselves. And directly he pushed back against the villainization of Black music by groups such as the White Citizens Council, who wanted it banned altogether. White and Black Americans flocked to rock and roll concerts throughout the 1950s, only to be met with segregation ropes, keeping them apart by societal norms. This study will show that these white teenagers did not care about segregation, and they hated being told how to behave by authorities. Their resistance led to teams tearing down these segregation ropes, where fully integrated concerts caused great alarm to the general public. Police frequently shut down concerts throughout the country for fear of integrated shows. College campuses refused to allow rock and roll bands in their concert halls because of the presumed riots, destruction of property, and anarchy that came with them. The resentment between younger and older Americans compounded throughout the decade as teenage behavior became the focus of hundreds of newspaper articles, dozens of books, journal articles, and films. In the 1950s, everyone was seemingly concerned with the behavior of the American teenager. Many might be fooled into believing only the 1960s contained public disorder, chaos in American culture as America's political landscape changed. Indeed, the 1950s are often known for many other themes, such as the Cold War, or the dull decade of the nuclear family, the conservative decade, the rise of the suburbs, the baby boom, etc. It is certainly true that these other areas are essential parts to the American teenager story as well, and they also must be considered. But as I will demonstrate with my research, the laws that came to be in the 1960s could not have been possible without the cultural change that occurred and should be attributed to the teenagers of the 1950s.